Social media law expert Emma Sadleir of the digital law company says there is a rise in sextortion in South Africa. More and more people falling prey to these ingenious scams. Sextortion is the use of images of people to lure victims to carry out sexually explicit acts. Now, these images or videos are taken and then used to blackmail the victim with the threat of public exposure. Social media expert Emma Sadleir joins us now to talk about this scam that is really causing havoc around the world, not only here in South Africa. Emma, great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for warning people about this very, very important issue.
It really is, and I mean, I think it's something that it's not necessarily new, but we're now seeing how bad it is and what it is actually doing to individuals. I gave a very basic definition of what sextortion actually is. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, you're right that it's not a new issue. It has been around for a long time. I was actually looking at the date on the blog that I published because this became a big issue a few years ago. And it made me realize that this really has been around for a while. But I think what's different is that it's got much cleverer. It's targeting children, whereas before it used to be people, particularly on the dating apps, platforms like Tinder, like Grindr. We used to see a lot of extortion, a lot of image-based violence there. But what I'm seeing now, Leanne, is a real targeting of children, particularly boys, and it's starting younger and younger. I think the youngest I've dealt with in the last couple of weeks has been a 10-year-old. And I think that particularly those tweens, the sort of 10 to 15 age range, they're quite vulnerable because they're quite innocent. You know, when they talk to somebody online, they presume that they're talking to the person that they say they are. Whereas I think as you get a bit older, you get a little bit more cynical, a little bit more cautious about sort of catfishing. And what generally happens is that they meet the person. They will be whoever you want them to be. You know, if you want interested in rugby, they'll be interested in rugby. If you're interested in a particular brand of clothing, that's who they'll be. And they start chatting to you, and they don't ask you for private sexual content immediately. They really take time to win your trust, talk to you, sometimes for days, weeks, even months. I think the youngest, the person I spoke to who was sextorted only sent messages to somebody after 8 months of talking to them. And as soon as they've got that content, they use that content to extort you. So they basically say, look, unless you give me money, sometimes it's a money transfer system, sometimes it's Bitcoin, then we're going to send this content to all of your contacts. We've downloaded all of your contacts from Instagram or from Facebook, wherever they've met you. With the kids are not on Facebook, so it's usually Instagram and then taken over to Snapchat. And then the children panic, and because they've done something that they know they shouldn't have done, which is speak to a stranger, send nudes to a stranger, they don't often come for help. And that is really where they get tangled into this web, because as soon as you start paying any money or giving any content, they do not let you alone. The other thing that they sometimes want, instead of money, is more pictures. So they'll send you a message saying, unless you send me this specific picture or this video of you doing this thing with this prop, then, so it's almost like digital child trafficking, as horrific as it sounds. And it's so prolific. I mean, I posted a quick video last week saying I get between 10 and 15 calls a day from parents whose kids have been caught up in this scam. Often it's much more than that. And it's almost like a playbook. You know, I know the script as I answer the phone. The parent is hysterical and they think it's the first time that it's ever happened. So I think it's due a warning. Be careful of who you're talking to online. Be careful that the person is actually who they say they are. My top tricks there are, if I'm talking to somebody for the first time online, video call them. And if they don't answer or they put you on the ceiling, then it's very likely this dodgy person who's going to start extorting you. The other thing I do is to do a reverse Google image search, or using any of the reverse image search platforms. There's a great one called TinEye of their profile picture. A lot of people won't know what I'm talking about. It sounds like I'm speaking a different language, but I take Leanne's profile picture and I search the internet. Instead of using words, I search the internet using an image. And then if that image has just been stolen for the purposes of creating a fake profile, I'll find out very quickly.
Sure. This is frightening. This is absolutely frightening. And I mean, I think I got stuck on the thing where you were saying that the youngest you've been dealing with is a 10-year-old, because, you know, at that age, what do you know? Honestly, you know, you're sitting online, you're chatting to somebody, and all of a sudden you are embroiled in this situation where, I mean, you can't handle things. I mean, I can't handle things at that age. I mean, you kind of think to yourself, I can think a little bit clearer, saying, listen, I don't think that this is real. I mean, how are you going to do this? In fact, how are you going to track all of my contacts and send images to them? Is that possible, by the way? I mean, can somebody actually do that?
Yeah, they do. So often it's just sort of filibuster. They say they're going to do all these things and they don't actually do them. But and I have to say, Leanne, this is not just, you know, somebody in a back room somewhere in South Africa. This is high level international organized crime. And they are very clever in so particularly if they meet you on Instagram, which is where they're meeting people at the moment, they'll download your contact list, and then they generally will find people who you're close to because you've posted pictures with them. Maybe that's your mother or your cousin or your best friend. And then just as a sort of a warning to show I'm serious, they'll send that picture to a few of your close contacts. You know, there's so many things to discuss here, because with the emergence of AI, often what I tell people is to say, well, just say it's not you, because there's so many fake images out there, that it's so easy to create this sort of deep fake sexual content of people. So it's almost like a converse where we can use AI and the emergence of AI as an excuse. But you know, this is, as much as there are laws, Leanne, so we've got the new Cybercrimes Act, we've got the laws that say if somebody sends a private sexual photo or video of you without your prior permission, it's a 300,000 Rand fine, or 4 years in prison. These are serious crimes, but the difficulty in executing, in using these crimes, is trying to find out who's behind the content. And that really is the difficulty, because it's so easy to pretend to be anybody. And suddenly you, as a teenager somewhere in South Africa, where your parents think you're playing a game or doing something fairly innocent on your phone, are already caught in this web of international criminal syndicates, is pretty frightening. So the law exists. There's also a specific crime of extortion in the Cybercrimes Act, which relates to any kind of blackmailing, extortion on the internet. You know, children, as much as they are young, the law starts applying to them. So what the law says in South Africa is that from the age of 14, sometimes even as young as 12, you have what we call criminal capacity. That means the capacity to commit a criminal offense, because usually sextortion happens with these big syndicates, but we see it even at school. It's almost like a form of bullying that we see at school. When somebody is,
pictures, WhatsApp groups.
Yeah, exactly. And also this sort of blackmailing that happens, this extortion that happens. When we think of image-based violence, a lot of us think about revenge pornography, but actually often the intention is to extort somebody to either get more content or to get money.
Yeah, so this is big business. This is big business. As you say, you're dealing with these international organizations. I mean, this is massive. So how do we protect our children? And I mean, this is something that I worry about all the time, because, you know, I've got kids at an age now where they are sitting in their rooms, they are using computers, they're playing games, they're sitting there and doing things that I check up on them, but I mean, I'm not hovering over their shoulder the entire time. So how do I look after my children's interests? Because at the end of the day, it is up to us to actually keep them as safe as we possibly can. Are there things that we can put in place? Are there signs we should look out for? How do we look after our children who can't necessarily look after themselves out there?
Yeah, it's such an important question. So the first thing I would say is education. Prevention is better than cure. You know, once that content exists, once it's floating around the internet, it can come back to cause your child harm down the line. So the first thing we need to do is educate our children. You know, in the same way that before we let our child go off and drive a fancy new car or even an old skadonk, they've got to learn the rules of the road. They've got to learn how to keep themselves as safe as possible, what the risks are, what the dangers are. And I think parents really have the primary duty to educate children. So the first thing is I would say no smartphones for children under the age of 13. And I know it's difficult. And particularly in South Africa, we see kids getting phones and smartphones and phones that are connected to the internet very young, almost as a sort of a status symbol. Look, I can afford to give my child a phone. So I'm begging people, please protect your children from the online world as long as possible. And I know people think that means I live in a different world and that we need to, but really, the internet has no shallow end. Once your children are online, they're online. They're going to come across dodgy people and they're going to come across dodgy content. And when they're little, they don't know how to deal with a lot of that predatory behavior. Yeah. So that's the first thing. I would even say no smartphones in primary school. Then when your children get older, educate them about what the laws are, what the disciplinary issues are, what the technical issues are. And I know it's difficult because it is my job, and I can tell you it's a full-time job staying on top of all the developments. But I think for parents, just to educate yourself. So if your child comes home and says, I want to play Fortnite, or I want to use Threads, the new app that was released over the weekend by Meta, then before you let your child onto those platforms, you spend 10 minutes with Google asking, and there are so many unbelievable resources out there, is this a suitable place for my child to be? Common Sense Media, Protect Young Eyes, Bark, they all produce these parents' ultimate guides to these platforms. And then you make the decision, are you happy for your child to be on that platform? When your child is young, check their devices, know what they're up to. In terms of your question about looking to see what behaviors to look out for, a big change in sleep patterns, moods, marks. If you see that your child is becoming a bit more withdrawn, I'd say these days, the first thing you do is check what they're up to on their phones. Absolutely. And there are apps that come free on the devices. So if your child has an Android device, Google Family Link is excellent. And I know it feels so daunting to learn how to use these platforms, but there are dummies guides all over the internet. So you spend 10 minutes of your life educating yourself. And if it's an iPhone, Apple Screen Time. And those are really good apps. They've got time budgets. Take your phone away from your kid when they sleep at night, because no good happens between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. on phones with teenagers. And yeah, just really protecting your child from this online world as far as possible.
And it is, and when you say protecting, I mean, I know, I see my little one, and she certainly doesn't have a phone and has I have no intention of getting her a phone anytime soon, but there are moments where she does sit. A lot of the time sitting, watching YouTube channels, watching TikTok and these dances and going one after the next, after the next, after the next, and they get into this. And then I suddenly notice anxiety levels actually starting to build, and you almost have to pull that device away. What is the link between people getting anxiety and being online? Because there is a definite link. I mean, you can see it happening straight away.
So as far as I'm concerned, there's a direct graph. The more screen time, the higher incidence of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. And, it sounds like I'm just being a scaremonger, but I live in this world. I'm the first responder when things go wrong with kids and teens in South Africa. So I've got a very good understanding about what the issues are on the ground. And they are big, right? So, and you see it, the addiction issues. And I don't use the word addiction flippantly. This is real addiction. When kids start with screen time, I see it with my toddlers. I've got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when I turn off the TV, it's almost like somebody's taken a drug away from a drug addict. So starting to really appreciate what it's doing in terms of addiction, what it's doing for our children's self-esteem. And be the parent. Don't be scared to be the parent. If you see that the longer your 15-year-old is staring at Instagram, the sadder they are, then put limits in place, or ask them for, take a social media detox. I think that the harm done to mental health with these apps is something that's been talked about sort of on the periphery for quite a long time, but now it's really coming to the fore. I think with the whistleblower testimony from Frances Hogan, who was working for Facebook, and basically came out and said that on Facebook's own research, Facebook Meta, they know how bad these platforms are for the mental health of teenagers, but it suits their bottom line, because the longer these kids are online, the more money they make. So
Crazy.
they've worked out that the sadder these teenagers are, the more time they spend online, the more time they spend online, the sadder they are. The sadder they are, the more time they spend online and the more money they make. So it's this vicious cycle.
That you get
And I
into.
think
You can't get out of
as
it.
parents,
It's
we
addiction.
need to intervene in that cycle.
I mean, you even see somebody like Mark Zuckerberg who posted a picture of his family and blurred out his children's faces, except for the baby. And that was a talking point for everybody where, you find parents and everybody just putting their family and all their personal information out there, and they still are doing it oblivious to the dangers that are associated with it. There's just one more question I want to ask you. I could speak to you all day because I know this is a major, major issue here, Emma, but AI, this is something that I know you touched on very briefly, but I wonder about AI all the time because I now see, and again, I go back to my daughter because she's the one who loves these things, and she's showing me how on Snapchat she has this personal AI that you can ask her any question and they've got an answer, and she's your friend and you can say anything to her, and it's your friend. You can say what you like. She's your personal AI. How safe are these things? I worry about that.
Yeah, I think that we're right to be worried. I think that some of the worry is a little bit of hysteria. I think in every generation in history, there's been new developments where people freak out about what it's doing to the children. But I do think that we need to keep a pretty close eye on these platforms. And Leanne, exactly as you're saying, talk to your children. The fact that you even know that there is a sort of a chat bot on Snapchat makes you in a very small percentage of parents, because parents so often have no idea what their children are up to. Yeah. So the issues that we're seeing with AI, obviously at the schools, we're seeing kids getting AI to do their homework for them. The teachers are pretty quick at picking it up. The writing style is just so different. What's interesting is that answers created by ChatGPT are not protected by copyright, because in order for something to be protected by copyright, it has to come from a person. And because this is a computer, copyright doesn't attach. So you don't have the sort of plagiarism issues, although of course we don't know about what input data is being used, because the input data is protected by copyright. But for me, it's fraud. If you're passing off content created by AI as your own, then that is a fraud issue. And we saw it with even a lawyer in the US a couple of weeks ago who got ChatGPT to write his submissions to court, and the ChatGPT just made up case names. And when he was hauled before the court and told what trouble he was in, and he is in big trouble, he's been fined and all sorts of disciplinary stuff, he said, well, he didn't know that ChatGPT could get it wrong. So I think just instilling in our children again cynicism and skepticism. Presume every single person you meet online is not who they say they are, number one. And number two, know that all of these amazing AI things are flawed. So having those discussions, knowing what your children are seeing, what issues are getting their attention, it's just so important. You have a duty to know what your children are up to as far as possible.
Emma, we've got literally a minute to wrap this up. But if, getting back to our original conversation, you become a victim of sextortion, what are the avenues you can go? How do you protect yourself? If I have done something like that, if my child has done something like that, given an image out, I'm being threatened, how do I now go about trying to clear what is going on? What are the avenues I can go and do?
Well, the first thing is so important. You do not pay them a single cent. If you pay them anything, they will not leave you alone. They will create literally hundreds of new numbers to target you. So you do not pay them anything. You block them everywhere. For a lot of clients, I advise to deactivate all social media accounts for a little while, just to limit, if they haven't downloaded your contact list, if there are old pictures that they could use to harm you further, just deactivate. You can reactivate when the sort of things have calmed down a little bit. Have a Google alert on your name, which just saves you from everyday Googling to make sure you haven't landed up on an adult website. And just as far as possible, spread the message that once that content exists, it's very dangerous. So please, we should be careful about sending this content even to people we know and trust in the real world. We certainly shouldn't be sending this content to people we don't know.
And certainly on these dating sites, that's also one of the areas that you really have to be very careful. Social media expert Emma Sadleir, thank you. Thanks for talking to us of Digital Law Company, speaking to us about a range of issues that are affecting not only children but adults as well online. But the big one, sextortion, and the rise of this happening in South Africa.